come from the end of AMCON, but by just way of some few lines, I'm sure a lot of us are quite familiar with what AMCON stands for, but I'm very sure the Managing Director will still throw a bit of light on it. So at this session, what we'll be hearing from them is an account of the state of play of AMCON and also what their plans are for 2024. But I must also comment. I will make some few comments that I've observed, and it's part of what I'll be sharing. I think that what I see in terms of compliance is very encouraging on the part of AMCON. I think that from all the sessions that I've witnessed, I think you are one agency that you have your statutory records up to date. Distinguished colleagues, if you check, no, there is no, you don't clap, you don't clap, you don't clap, you don't clap. So don't be too quick. There will be some hard questions along the way, so I would imagine what you will do then. But we don't clap. But as I was saying, in terms of statutory compliance, if you check your folders, I'm sure you will find the audited accounts as at 2022. Copies are all in the folder. But in addition to that, distinguished colleagues, please, if I have your attention. But in addition to that, I also am very happy to say that, on the part of AMCON, even before today's session, before we started the budget session, they had also forwarded to my office a copy of their performance as at September 2023, which is very commendable. So I will share the copies, and it will form a better and more informed basis of our conversation this morning. So where is Victor? Victor, please, you can share it to the members, but we will retrieve it once we are done. But it tells it tells a lot about how far they have gone, even in 2023, beyond the 2022 accounts that they have forwarded. It gives an account of what is going on, which is very commendable. It's a management account, but it's also a compliance issue that I think I should mention. So, AMCON, I want to plead with you that you should continue along these lines so that we don't have to be running after you before we get an update as to what is going on in your organization. So at this point, before I yield the floor to the MD of AMCON, I would like my other colleagues that have come in again to introduce themselves.
Insurance and other financial institutions, distinguished Senator Mukaila Adetokumbo Abiru, other distinguished senators here, the staff of the National Assembly, my colleagues from AMCON. As usual, it's always an honor for us to have this opportunity to interact with distinguished members, and particularly at this very crucial time that we are ending the year. This engagement is also very important for us because it is the first formal engagement that we are having with the members. So on behalf of management and staff of AMCON, I wish to thank the distinguished members, for finding time, to receive us, given the other crucial engagements that we're aware of that is going on at the National Assembly. We've always had quite a lot of support and engagement with the distinguished senators even before now, and we do hope and appeal that the support will continue to be there, because at the end of the day, we believe we are all working on the basis of the same objective. As a way of background, it is always good to briefly tell you what AMCON is all about. If you could recall the global financial crisis of 2008-2009, nations all over the world encountered quite a lot of financial challenges, and one of the outcomes is most of the governments around the world decided that they needed to intervene because the financial institutions has collapsed. There was no liquidity. Loans have gone bad with the banks. So in Nigeria, we set up the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria with the intention of buying the non-performing loans from the commercial banks so that we can provide liquidity for them. Because of the financial crisis, the Central Bank of Nigeria conducted special investigation in 24 banks. And as a result of the financial special examination, they realized that those 24 banks require some kind of financial support. And as a result of that, a bill was passed 2010 by the National Assembly, which was assented to by the government of President Goodluck Jonathan on the 19th of July 2010. Since the enactment of the Act in 2010, there has been further amendment. One was in May 2015, July 2019, and November 2021, all with the view of making AMCON stronger and stronger. The main objective at the time AMCON was set up was to buy the loans from the banks, provide financial accommodation to some of them, and then deal with the loans subsequently by selling some of the assets so that they can also meet their own obligations. So when AMCON was set up, we purchased 12,743 non-performing loans, worth about 3.7 trillion. But we paid 1.8 trillion to 22 commercial banks at that time. That was somewhere in 2011. The corporation has also injected 2.2 trillion into 10 commercial banks at that time to bridge and bring their net asset value, to zero. And then they've also provided financial accommodation to 5 banks. In summary, what was done at that time, there were some banks that the net asset value was below the regulatory acceptable limit. So what CBN did at that time was they put in some money into those banks, bring their financial accommodation, the asset value to zero. And then there are some banks that also require some financial accommodation. They also provided those financial accommodation to them. So 2.2 trillion was provided for that. That 2.2 trillion was not covered by any collateral. However, for some of the banks that are also still existing, but because of the financial crisis, they didn't have money to on-lend to jumpstart the economy. At that time, the law now allows AMCON to purchase the loan and provide liquidity for them so that they can on-lend. So loans worth 3.7 trillion was purchased from 21 banks, and we purchased it at 1.8 trillion. The thinking at that time was, because of the discount based on the purchase, it was assumed that the collateral that was covering the 1.8 trillion will be enough subsequently to also take care of the 2.2 trillion, based on certain assumptions that was made at that particular time. And along the line also, when Skybank was showing very serious sign of distress, AMCON was also asked to also intervene in Polaris Bank. Now, the funding, there was a funding model. How did CBN got the money? CBN now raised bonds were raised, and on the basis of those bonds, the liquidity was provided to the commercial banks. So AMCON intervention activity was funded by the debt obligation of 4.6 trillion at that time, which was part of the liquidity that was raised in the market. It is worth knowing also that AMCON has not been set up as a profit-making entity, but has been set up as an intervention entity at that time with a funding model to cover a period of 10 years. And it was also assumed that AMCON, from its own activity, it should be able to recover 30% of the 1.8 plus the 2.2 trillion for the payment and redemption of the bond. And a banking resolution sinking fund was also created, where banks were also mandated to contribute certain percentage of the balance sheet, 0.05% of the balance sheet annually, and CBN is also contributing 50 billion annually into the sinking fund, which means that 70% of the redemption amount that is expected for the bond that was used to purchase the loan should come from that banking sector resolution sinking fund. At that time also, it was envisaged that the banking industry will grow at the rate of 20%, And if the banking industry grew at the rate of 20%, it was envisaged that within a period of 10 years, AMCON will be able to settle its own obligations. Unfortunately, that was not the reality. What happened subsequently. The actual growth rate in the banking industry from 2013 to 2017 was averaging around 8 to 9% against the 20%, that was envisaged. In monetary terms, AMCON was not able to recover about roughly around 250 billion, which was supposed to have come from the sinking fund. Now, when the original bond matured around 2013, and then the recovery rate was not as it was expected, what CBN did was to refinance the bond and then took the bond into their balance sheet at the rate of 6%. So from 2013, AMCON was paying 6% on the roughly 4.5 trillion to Central Bank of Nigeria for the refinance of the bond. Now, despite the challenges, actual contribution to the sinking fund from AMCON from inception to 2022 stood at about 36%, while the banking sector dissolution fund contributed around 64%. Now, we copiously always mention that we still have 4.5 trillion always outstanding. Why? Because the refinancing that CBN did attracts an interest of 6%, which means that every year annually we are paying almost 230 billion as interest element to CBN. So for quite some few years, AMCON was only able to pay interest element. We were not in a position to pay the principal because the 6% on 4.5 trillion, if you do this simple arithmetic, you see that it's a lot of money. However, from our own operations, AMCON has been able to recover around 1.8 trillion. And we've been able to settle our obligations to CBN up to 2021. We're in up to 2022, we're in 2023 now. So by January, we'll start talking about the settlement for 2023. Distinguished senators, it's also important that we understand a little of the balance sheet of AMCON. On one side, there is the liability based on the money that we took now from CBN to buy the loans. That is outstanding, which from our recovery, we're supposed to pay that. On one side, we also have about 12,600 loans, which we purchased that have names, which we are supposed to recover. It is what we recover from that we use to pay the liability to CBN, including the contribution that the banks are supposed to be making, annually. So, but when we did a needed analysis, we realized out of the 12,700 loans that we purchased at the rate of 1.8 trillion, which currently now maybe stood somewhere around 3 trillion, unfortunately, because as you are recovering also, you are also charging interest on the loan. So if your recovery rate is hanging around 10%, you are now charging interest around 15%. So obviously, as you are moving, you are also taking some step backward. So out of the 12,700 loans that we purchased, only 350 obligos account for more than 80% of the whole 1.8 trillion out of 350. Part of these 350, 246 of them were in court with them. So you can understand the kind of complications that AMCON is inside. 350 obligos account for more than the 4.5 trillion, only 350 Nigerians typically, out of the 12,000. And out of the 350, more than 76% of them are in court with us. One, whether High Court or Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court. So obviously that also affects your ability, to recover those money. And it is also worthy to note that the entire collateral coverage of the EBA that is currently in our books, that is to say, the entire loans that is currently in our books, which stood around 4.7 trillion, if I sell all the assets that I currently hold in AMCON, it can only cover roughly 14%. Only 14%. Because when the loans were sold, they were sold with some assets, and unfortunately, most of those assets, because of passage of time, did not cover the whole amount that was purchased, plus the 2.2 trillion. Because of that, that was one of the reasons why we even came for the amendment to our act to allow us to do asset tracing. And we're able to trace some of these assets, which has also helped us in the disposal of our reduction of our liability. Part of our activities also involve disposal of assets. Recovery from asset disposal so far only account for around 10% so far, because disposing of assets also has posed a lot of challenge to AMCON, because there are quite a lot of title issues, quite a lot of legal issues. Most of our assets are distressed assets, so it's not usually very easy, for us to also dispose our assets. So far from inception, we've been able to sell only 450 assets. Because sometimes when people talk about AMCON, they only think about asset sales. But since inception, AMCON has been able to only sell 250. For even 2023, we only sold 32 assets, worth about 43 billion naira. And currently, because of our operations, we have more than 2,000 cases in the various levels of court, which means that once you are in court, there are certain things that you may not be able to do. And that is why part of the challenges that we have is also related to how we are dealing with the judiciary. Distinguished Chair, distinguished Senators, because of the peculiar way we operate, we've been given quite a lot of special powers that is only known to AMCON. But unfortunately, the powers can only work if the judiciary are ready to activate it. And I think quite a lot of those powers still have not been tested, and this is part of the appeal along the line that we request some of the distinguished senators to help us to look at. And again, it is also important that we bring to your attention that if today, on the basis of the amount of loan that we purchase, which is about 1.8 trillion, you will see that our recovery so far is in excess of 1.7 trillion. So which means, technically speaking, we have recovered more than 70%. However, you have to factor in the interest, and you also have to factor in the 2.2 trillion. That is why sometimes when you make 2 steps forward, you make 1 step, unfortunately, backward. However, AMCON typically is a special purpose vehicle. It was set up for a purpose. So generally speaking, it should also have a sunset period. And that is why we always talk about sunset period. The funding model was designed initially to last for 10 years. But when the 10 years expired and we are not able to settle our liability fully with CBN, we came back to the National Assembly, and then they extended it to 2025. So what it tells us is that we have to seriously work to ensure that we put all the mechanism in place so that by 2025 we extinguish all the liabilities. Internally, for the last 2 years, we've been working on our sunset winding down activities, and with the current dispensation, I think it has also been escalated in such a way that we put a framework in place so that by the time the funding model expires, we would have addressed almost, all the issues. So for us in AMCON, given the kind of work that we've done so far, the support of the National Assembly is also very, very important, for us. The last time when the BOFIA was amended, there was a provision for credit tribunal, and we are also expected to participate in that credit tribunal because it has a period within which they can sort out, any case that is brought before them. Unfortunately, up to now, the credit tribunal has not also been constituted. We have cases in court that has been there for the last 8, to 10 years, because it's very easy when we push our obligors. What they do is they just go to court on the basis of some frivolous, request, and then they either get some injunctions or then they tie us up in court. And that is why we continuously also engage with the judiciary to see that they accelerate the process. Because what is important for AMCON, for us to be able to meet our winding down sunset period, is that those cases in court must also be expeditiously attended to, as provided in the law, because the law says that any case that is before any judge should be finished within 90 days. Any appeal that should be made against any AMCON judgment, the financial consideration should be deposited with the registrar of the court. Unfortunately, all those ones are not being adhered to, because it will have discouraged, people from just going for some frivolous kind of appeal that has an intention, to slow us down. So operationally, distinguished chair, distinguished members, based on the amount of loan that was raised to buy the EBA at the beginning, if you use that against what we have recovered so far, you will see that we've recovered more than 70% of that. But I continue to emphasize that because of the, because of the interest element, we've been saddled. It's just like we're going around a cycle. So we really need to come together, and we are also trying to work with CBN to see how to readdress the funding model in such a way that certainly within a certain given period of time, we should be able to close our books. From 2011, when we started operation, we have paid into the bond 1.4 trillion, and also from the contribution from the banking sector resolution costing fund, we've also been able to recover about 2.5 trillion. So a total of around 4 trillion has been so far recovered. But because, again, I say because of the interest element, we're still almost, at the same location. Now, generally, almost every year, we pay average of around 340 billion to CBN in December for the redemption of our bond. But out of that 340 billion, almost 210, 220 is only interest. So only the balance, which represent less than 30%, represent the principal repayment. So obviously, the interest has always been, an issue for us. So we are also going to give you the list of the top 500 obligors, so that you will see the obligors that are accounting for almost 80 to 90% of what we are currently, doing. Based on our performance in terms of the budget, we envisage, we plan that based on the 2023 budget, we are going to recover 87 billion in terms of cash recovery. We've done almost 80% of that. The total budget collection based on AMCON activities, we budgeted that we'll do 140 billion for 2023. As at end of November, we've done 80% of that, which is around 111 billion. So we are planning for 2024 to increase that 140 that we planned for 2023. For 2024, we are planning to do 155 billion. Now, this year has been very slow. Number one, it's an election year. Number two, there is a change in government. Number three, the issues of fuel subsidy and quite a lot of things that we are all familiar with that is happening has actually affected quite a lot of businesses, which has also affected our ability, to recover, substantially from what we budgeted for. But so far, we've done around 80% of our budget, and we are hoping, based on the transaction that we have in the pipeline, we should be able to ease towards achieving our budget in December, God willing. So, but we provided that for next year, in spite of the fact that we know the environment is still very harsh, we have increased our performance projections based on the 2022 by 11% to do around 155 billion for 2024. Now, for the operating expenses, we budgeted that we are going to spend 20 billion for 2023. Up to November, we have spent 18 billion, and we are projecting to do 25 billion, for 2024. This is about 26% increase. Most of our expenses hinged around two areas, which is the personnel cost, which accounts for almost 51%, and the professional fees that we pay for our lawyers, which is based on performance. Those ones are paid only when they're able to recover for us. So substantially, our budget is all around operational, cost in terms of maintenance of our assets, training, and enforcement cost. For our capital projects, last year we budgeted we are going to spend 959 million, but we actually spent 198 only, but we are budgeting that we are going to do 1.2 billion because most of our software and our computers are out of time, so certainly we are going to change quite a lot of them. We budgeted that we were going to do it last year. We were not able to accomplish that. So basically, Mr. Chairman, sir, distinguished chair, this is part of our report for 2023.
Thank you very much. I won't take that for granted. But having listened to you carefully, I think from the remarks that you made, my understanding is that as at today, and based on your September performance that you had forwarded to us, you underscored the point that you have almost a total obligation total exposure of almost about 5.8 trillion naira, of which your total assets is about 1 trillion, meaning that you have about 4.8 trillion, meaning that you have an exposure of about 4.8. Now, you also alluded to the fact that of the total obligors that you have, 85% of them, representing about 350, they will account for about 4.7 trillion. I think that's a major issue, and it also, for me, it makes it a lot easier for you to go after those 850 outside of the 12,000 basket of eligible bank assets that you have, or obligors that you have. But more importantly is that I would like you to explain to us, one, AMCON was meant to be, is a child of circumstance. Ordinarily should have exited, maybe we should have wound it down in 2020, but we have had to extend it just because of the fact that it's been difficult to redeem the entire obligation. Now, if we carry a total obligation of close to 5 trillion today, we need your plans as to how AMCON will be wound down, because it is not meant to be a permanent arrangement, one. Two, what is your sense of the fact that, you are dealing with assets that are challenged, and meanwhile, the obligation you carry, you also have a 6% interest that is being charged on that obligation by the regulatory agency. Because my own understanding is that once you have accounts that are challenged, you better just suspend interest on them and all of that. So if you have a situation like this and you are still charging, and you went further to say that even from the resolution resolution trust fund or cost fund, trust fund, that your total collections or receivables there on a yearly basis is about 350 billion, if I'm correct. Am I correct? Now, of which, okay, increases with time.
Balance sheet of the
But out of that, I mean, that's the money that you are meant to use to wind down all of this obligation. But the principal amount of the obligation you want to wind down is almost about 5 trillion, and the interest element is about 230 billion. So meaning that you barely can even repay principal on a yearly basis once you meet the interest. So the question is, should we not be thinking, or should we not have a rethink as to how we deal with the interest element? I think it's important if we must really term out the real capital, yes, that's the capital. So an explanation. Now, I'm not sure I heard you right. Did you say again, even the obligation on the part of the customers, you are charging interest on that as well? Are we not complicating an already bad situation? So if we are ever going to resolve AMCON, I think we need to get practical and very real with ourselves. But your own response will help this conversation. Now, before I round up, I didn't get the bit about the clarity of your powers, the special powers that you mentioned. I think it would be nice for you to clear it. And of course, what's my last point before I yield the floor? So I think for me, for now, then again, I would like you to speak to the situation of Polaris. I think it's important because from the total obligation that you have, you mentioned that Polaris exposure is about 648. Where are you coming from? Where are you? And what are the chances of your recouping it? Because as it is today, it is assumed you have sold Polaris, and I think it is important you let us know exactly what the state of play is and how we can also get out of it. So I will pause at this point, and I will now invite my colleagues to also ask their own questions before you respond. Thank you.
Spoke about the winding down. Of course, we are aware that AMCON is a special purpose vehicle, typically created for a purpose. And if you recall in my presentation, I did mention that there's a funding model. The funding model typically takes care of the payment of the obligation that was used to purchase the loans. So typically, if you are able to settle your obligations with the bondholders, you would have met your obligations, so you would have closed shop. And when it was set up, it was assumed that the recovery from AMCON operations would contribute 30%, and then the resolution sinking fund will contribute somewhere around 70%. Now, along the line, quite a lot of those assumptions didn't happen because the economy didn't grow the way it was expected to grow. The banking sector didn't grow the way it was expected to grow. So the funding for this, finance for the funding model came up with a gap. Now, when we realized that, and that was when we came and then we extended it 2025. Now, the good thing about the winding down is that there is already that is coded in the law, the contribution that is supposed to come from the banks. Now, the whole idea about AMCON is all about the financial institution, it's about the banks. So obviously, the resolution must also rest from the banks. And that is why we are now working. We've started working, like I said, we started working like 2 years ago on how to make sure that we close. We have to make sure that we're able to close shop, by that 2025. And one of the ways to do that, number one, you have to come up with a framework that will address the inflow that is coming from the banks to settle the liability that rests with CBN. So we are working with our advisors to redesign the funding model. There is no any model that will extinguish 4.3 trillion in 1 year. But there is a model that you'll be able to extinguish that bond obligation that sits with CBN in the next maybe 10 years. You can do that if you come up with a funding model. But you don't need a structure to be able to do that, because what you'll do is that at the end of every financial year, you will debit one account in CBN and then credit that loan account. So we are working with our advisors to deal with that. Once you deal with that, what you are left with now is how do I deal with the loans, that is the EBAs. How do I deal with AMCON's customers? Now, like I said, the outstanding on that side is also around 3 trillion. The security coverage for it is less than 17%, maybe around 670 billion. So, and when we realized that the security coverage was not enough, we even came back to the National Assembly, and they also gave us powers to do asset tracing outside what the obligors had provided as collateral. And we've been tracing assets. The problem with tracing assets is if you trace an asset, you have to go to the court and then get a court order for you to be able to deal with that asset. Otherwise, even if you sell the asset, you will not be able to transfer title. So, but how do you deal with the loan? That in itself is also not too complicated, but we are also working with the advisors to come up with options. One way to deal with it is you can package it and sell it as a unit to any of those private sector, private asset managers at a discount. Because if, for example, you are able to deal with your obligation with CBN, which is the 4.7 trillion, based on the contribution from the banks, you said in 10 years they'll be able to extinguish that, and then you key in, the interest to reflect what is the reality. Then you are in a position to sell those assets at a discount. You are in a position, government is in a position to even set up a special task force, including all the other security agencies, to pursue those obligors. So all those options are on the table on the side, but that is a political decision ultimately at the end of the day on how to deal with it. You can also give special discount, heave off the interest out of it, and then go back to the obligors and say, okay, I heave off this interest, but the interest that you are going to heave off is real interest, which you will have to add on the other side, which the banks also must have to carry on this other side, because the interest is also real interest. So you can heave off those interests and then sit down with the obligors, because really, at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, we have to give substantial discount to some of these obligors, because some of the accounts, I've asked them to distribute, some of the top 500,
Let me just interject here. As I listen to you, practical solution, you have identified what you need to term out, which is about 5 trillion. But you see, the element of interest, both on the asset side and on the liability side, you have to show serious moderation if you want to be practical. I think so. So in engaging your advisors, I think is a key issue. You cannot, for a loan that is almost bad in your hands, let's put it that way, you cannot be charging 6% interest when the hope of recovery is almost not existent. Do you understand? Then even on the side of the asset side, even the so-called obligors, you have an asset cover of less than 17%. You understand? And my sense is that you are charging 15% on that loan. I think, I'm not making a judgment call, but I think that you also must find a way to moderate it, maybe to manage this situation for us to get out. I'm just suggesting.
Thank you very much, distinguished Chair. I think that, but that is a CBN call, unfortunately, because we have come to, we've been to National Assembly, we have been to National Assembly several times in the last couple of years, and National Assembly have made pronunciations about, you know, not the 10th, as a previous, you know, because it doesn't make any sense to charge 6%, you know. I say it doesn't make any sense to charge 6%. Then, but the model also, which again, some of us also found it a bit discomforting, where you are buying a non-performing loan from banks. Those loans had traditionally been bad in the books of the banks. Now you transfer them to AMCON, also you now started charging interest rates. Because even in the banks have stopped charging interest rates. So obviously that also is an issue. It has to, that issue, that also needs to be addressed. Okay, you know, so I think, so that is what we are doing with the winding down. We are working on it, and I think there is stakeholders meeting, CBN, AMCON, MOFI, that is Ministry of Finance Incorporated. We are engaging, and at a certain point in time, we are also going to involve, you know, the National Assembly. The next one, you talked about the interest, we've discussed that. You needed some clarification about the special powers. You know, AMCON has so many special powers, and if the judiciary has worked on the special powers, we have special power to apply for expedite order, powers for bankruptcy proceedings, which is special to AMCON, winding down proceedings, which is peculiar to AMCON, power to act as a receiver manager, power to get information and publish the information, power to obligation of the High Court to appoint AMCON judges, obligation on the Court of Appeal, the appellant courts also appoint special courts for AMCON. You know, so all these powers are there that the National Assembly has been enacted into law, which we again will appeal to the Senate for us to work together, particularly with the Committee on Judiciary, to see how we can activate, you know, those powers. Because if we activate those powers, I think it will help us to reduce the number of cases that we're currently, you know, in court. The issue of Polaris is a self-liquidating kind of liability, because when we took those liability from Polaris and then injected the fund to bring the net asset value also to zero, all the recoveries that are made are tailored towards reducing that bond liability. So it's self-liquidating. So what we are working with CBN now that the entity has been sold is now to see how do we transfer this liability back to them. If they want to deal with it, they will deal with it, because it is not EBA per se. EBAs are loans that we purchase and we hold it. This one, we took the loans because of our special powers to help them to recover. And the transaction is such that the bond that is put in that entity must be recovered, and which is around maybe 890 billion or thereabout, against which some of these liabilities are raised. So it's self-liquidating. So we are working on how to now transfer them back to CBN.
Let me, so in your September report, 79 billion.
Yes.
Now, your position as of September 2023 is stated as 648 billion. Are you saying that, you know, the difference has been recovered?
Yes. Yes, we have made substantial recovery. Yes, correct.
So if that is the case, now, what are the chances of recovering the balance? Because it's looking like an interesting case. If in a particular instance, you know, meaning that out of the 5 trillion, if I'm correct, about 900 billion has been isolated, and that 900 billion has been paid down to 648. That's the impression I'm getting. Am I correct to say that?
No. No. That is not fact. That is not.
No. You said
we didn't recover.
of some of the discourse that you've taken over, especially looking at the fact that their financials seems not to be performing or encouraging. The second one is that the liquidity problems that most of the non-performing entities that you have under AMCON control. Are we going to continue with them this way? Because I knew AMCON came in order to stabilize and re-engineer these entities. Are we going to continue like this 13 years after? And can we say that the reason for the establishment of AMCON is justified under these circumstances? Because I can see from the balance sheet here, the profit and loss summary, most of the digits there are at loss. Are we going to continue doing that? I mean, if we are to do this after 13 years, then there is reason for us, I mean, it has given us a good reason to call for the amendment or the scrapping of AMCON. Because, I mean, I have not seen it. Most of the bad loans have been almost given for free. We have not seen any action. I was a member of the 9th Assembly, and we have had cause of interaction with the management of AMCON. And we have raised issues. We have seen where AMCON have taken over loans, non-performing loans, from even individual companies. And we have not seen those companies either sanctioned. At the end of the day, the same companies go back to buy back their assets that have been taken over. Are we going to continue like this? So I think, Mr. Chairman, it's not only about the pending budget. It's about seeing what are we appropriating for. What are we appropriating? Is it working? Or we just create a job for those that we can protect? I think there is need for us to.
My chairman, distinguished colleagues, I'm Senator Onyekachi Peter Nwebonyi, the Deputy Whip of the Senate and a member of this committee. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Senator Jimo Ibrahim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and distinguished colleagues. About AMCON is wrong, but I am a bit astonished by the fact that your balance sheet isn't looking good at all. And it calls for concern. For example, your total comprehensive profit and loss at the end of the year came into a loss of 145 billion naira. This calls for concern. And when you look at the operating net operating profit and loss, you also see 126 billion there. That again is very. What is responsible for all these big losses? Because you are created to just collect loan back from debtors. And even if you are now a regulator to the debtors, why are you sounding so not too, impressive? I think the operating expenses too is very, very high. Like I said, I would not say that AMCON is a bad idea at all, but I am saying that this balance sheet doesn't, maybe something happened, I don't know why we're talking about 120-something billion. Secondly, Mr. Chairman, my question have to do with, before I come to my last question, Chairman talked about special powers. 2 minutes. Yeah, it's okay, we're not in a hurry. Now, you talk about special powers, and you go on enumerating them. Are you aware that where your special power conflicts with the provision of the Constitution to the extent of its inconsistency is void and of no effect. And you cannot operate in a draconian way with a special power as if we are in a military regime. But there are soft, fine ways, like you suggested, MD, by which you can actually recover your loan, discounted interest rate and all that. Now, the only question I will ask you is simple, very simple. Why are you buying cash collateralized loan? I come again. Why are you buying cash collateralized loan in which you yourself admitted that this cash, you saw it? Why are you now buying the loan? Are you set up, in fairness, to buy cash collateralized loan? Thank you very much, but I like your presentation and your defense of your position and the figures. But why are you buying cash collateralized loan?
Thank you, Senator Jimo Ibrahim.
I don't want to provide further and better particulars.
Yes,
I'll leave it like that to executive session because I don't.
I think I also agree that there is no society that doesn't have one AMCON in one form or the other. It's just a typical business cycle. There will always be a boom, there will be a bust. So when there is a bust, you must be able to address it. In financial cycle, you have to deal with financial stability, and the only way you can resolve issues around it can only be through a creation of an entity like this. Let me go further to also say that in fairness to the operators there, even the cleanup, it's just that it's looking a bit difficult to clean up. They are the ones actually contributing the money for the cleanup. So when you hear Resolution Trust Fund, it is the banks that are also being challenged or taxed to pay a portion of their balance sheet into this resolution fund. So when he was referring to the collections into the resolution trust fund of 350 billion yearly, those monies are actually coming from the banks. And the only other, all the banks. Yes. So it's a concept of you created a mess, but we must also fashion out a way that you will clean it up. If I'm correct, it's just looking somehow a bit difficult. That is why the issue around interest charges and all of that, we need to rethink it properly. See again, this is an exercise that started in 2010. And if you look at the balance sheet of most banks that are 2010 and compare it to what the balance sheet is today, it has grown. You understand? So my distinguished colleague. Are you here, Chairman? No, my distinguished colleague.
And the MD of AMCON can come here.
No, hold on. Order. I think what is important, we have to get the correct construct out there to the public. That's why I'm saying this. It's not, we also should be let them know that we understand what they are doing. So on this note, let me call on Senator Babangida.
Appreciate the desirability of having an institution that will safeguard our financial sector. And AMCON, for me, shouldn't even be a temporary structure, but should be a permanent structure, because we can't run away from the reality of the financial sector. That's one. No. Well, it's my position anyway. That's one. Yes. Thank you, Chair. That's one. So for me, I look forward to deepening and strengthening the institution so that they can do very well in the mandate that is bestowed on it. The second issue I want to speak to MD is your allusion to the fact that when the chairman raised the nitty-gritty issues that you raised about the funding and the challenges you are having, you said it's a CBN call to make. And I think in designing this exit strategy to deal with the issues that were highlighted here, I think it is a collective responsibility of not only CBN, but even the National Assembly here. I think that collaborative relationship should be strengthened, deepened in a transparent and sincere manner. And I think that's what I want to call on the management to imbibe the culture of that collaborative relationship. It shouldn't be about CBN alone. It should be a national issue, and all the institutions that will help in dealing with the matter should be involved as well. Those are my two comments, and I thank you for your wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Babangida. Any more? I'm just going to Senator Jimmy Kuta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issue has become a national issue some time ago. And my question is this. Why is it that at the end of the day, reliably, I can share more light, Mr. Chairman, in the closed session. Someone was ready to buy this same Polaris for point-something trillion, and the first offer he made, 800, then he will balance up. Then later we'll now hear in the news that they sold it for 450. On what wisdom? Billion. What is the wisdom behind that? And I think we need to revisit this issue properly now in this 10th Senate. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jimmy Kuta. Any
sale of Polaris Bank. Polaris Bank was sold for 1.3 trillion naira. And the initial amount paid was about 500 billion naira. And the rest of the money was to be paid within 10 years. So whoever is saying that somebody was willing to buy it for 800 billion.
It's not 800.
800 what?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I'm protected. I didn't say it.
Let me finish. Let me finish.
But let me correct you, sir.
No, let me finish before you.
Okay.
You can correct me after I finish. Yes. I happen to know the transaction on Polaris Bank. I saw all the documents. I meticulously went through them, and I found nothing unusual in that transaction, because somebody offered 500 billion naira, and the rest of the money was to be paid within a period of 10 years. And I knew that the owner of that bank is now working assiduously to ensure that he pays that money before even 10 years' time. So there is a lot of misinformation, a lot of speculation and going on. And I don't want us to act on innuendos and speculative statements. So whatever we want to say, let it be based on facts and figures. Mr. Chairman, this is what I have to say on the sale of Polaris Bank.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator Alero. Thank you very much. We'll have a closed session when we are done with this. I think it will be better, that would be a better way to handle it, because you are dealing with a live financial institution, and I think the facts must be very accurate. So let's suspend further conversation till we get to closed session. Thank you.
And I will not fail to appreciate Chairman for giving quite a lot of highlights and on insights on what we do, because it's very important people understand AMCON, because if AMCON was not created, you can only imagine what could have happened, really, with benefit of hindsight, because the more than 21 banks would have gone under, more than 3,000 jobs are at risk, more than 2 trillion naira at that time was at risk. So at that time, really, if you ask me if I was there, maybe that one could have done the same way. Benefit of hindsight would have said, oh, why am I charging interest? Why, there are certain things you could have controlled. But it was the model that all the banks, operated all over the world. Discos, we only took over only one disco, Ibadan disco. And, excuse me. We only got involved in one disco, which is Ibadan, and I think we are in the process of divestment. We don't dwell into what they do. We are creditors. Government, if you recall, decided to intervene in about 4 of them: Ibadan, Kaduna, Benin, Port Harcourt, and Ibadan. Ibadan is the only one that is with AMCON. The others are with other commercial banks, and I think some of them have even sold them. So we are also in the process of divesting from Ibadan Disco as a creditor on behalf of some other creditor banks. Because we bought the loan from Skybank, and that's why we are in Ibadan Disco. The liquidity situation under some of those companies that are under AMCON. You see, AMCON was not created to run any business. AMCON is a recovery agency. We are created to recover money and pay our debts. We are not interested in what other businesses are doing. I can tell you frankly, there is only maybe one company or two that you'll see that AMCON got involved in it, and that one, it was based on some strategic national issues. Otherwise, we don't get involved in anybody's business. We get into businesses to recover money, and that has always been our mandate. And when we were created, based on the 1.8 trillion that was used to purchase the loan, AMCON has recovered more than 96% of that. If we remove the interest that the chairman is talking about, AMCON would have said it would have been the best performing asset management corporation in the world, I can tell you. But because of the interest element, that is why the recovery rate is still looking very, very poor. But so we are not involved in any liquidity situation of any company. We don't put our money in any company. We go there to recover and pay our debt obligations. And really, you know, AMCON law does not even allow anybody to come and buy asset from it. It's against the law. You can't come and buy your asset. You can come and pay your liability. You know, you can come and pay your liability, but you can't buy your loan. AMCON cannot also be scrapped like that. It's a process. You know, it's a long process. It has to be, you know, it has to follow that process. It's not a profit-making organization, I can tell you.
Okay, MD, I thank you. I think to a very reasonable extent, you have addressed all the questions. Now, at this point, hello, is anything outstanding? Yes. The fact that it was set up using a model that will help us tidy up the challenges that we had in the financial system dating back to the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008 that gave rise to the institution, and equally with a model that also well suited for the agency in terms of repaying the eligible bank assets that they acquired. The only challenge that we have to date will remain the sunset date, which is to say that we must have a definitive time to actually make sure that we wind down, meaning that all of the obligations that are hanging in the books of AMCON must be redeemed. And the conclusion is that we will continue to work with AMCON and the other and the Apex agency in order to fashion out a way to make sure that AMCON is hopefully wound down within the shortest possible time. So I want to thank you for your time. And at this point, I will want one of my colleagues to move for the adjournment of this session. Thank you very much.